Jeremy Lent, he just wants to be called Jeremy. He's the author and founder of Leology Institute. You have to tell us a little bit more about that. But his message is one of history, of how people can make important changes. And well, I think we'll just get into the video and you'll help understand where he comes from and what his contribution is.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Lent, author of The Patterning Instinct and the upcoming book, The Web of Meaning. And I'm going to be taking you through today some of the deeper implications of the choices each of us makes regarding whether it's diet, lifestyle, or our practices on shifting the direction of our global culture and even our civilization. When each of us makes a commitment to move toward a plant-based diet, we might have our own unique set of reasons, maybe some mixture of health-related reasons, environment and climate-related, and moral reasons arising from the horrendous animal cruelty that's so pervasive. Now, in themselves, each of these issues are crucially important, but I'm going to take you through today some highlights from my own work showing how they are related to a whole web of interconnected forces that together have the potential to transform our civilization this century onto a different trajectory, what some people refer to as the Great Transformation. So now I'm going to shift and share my screen for a slideshow. And let's begin here. What we are looking at, and what I'm going to take you through, the title of the presentation is Plant-Based Diets as Part of the Great Transformation. And maybe begin with why we need that great transformation in the first place. Something I'm sure a number of people watching are very familiar with, but just to get our basis of where we're starting from, let's take a look at our home, the Earth, the only place we know of in the universe where life exists, and where a couple of 100,000 years ago, the human modern species evolved and took a sort of commanding presence on this earth. And how are we managing it? Well, of course, we know that from a climate perspective, we're doing an absolute disastrous situation. We're headed towards a 3 to 5 degrees Celsius rise this century, and current policies in climate absolute catastrophic. And even a 2-degree rise would be a prescription for disaster, according to climate experts. And even the radical changes we'd need to get to that 1.5 degrees Celsius is itself not a safe target because of the zone of cascading amplifying feedbacks. But here's the thing, even if we were somehow able to find some magic bullet that really solved the climate crisis rapidly enough, we've got to recognize that we are experiencing vast ecological destruction across the board. We're looking at a 68% decline in animal populations since 1970, all around the world. The 6th great extinction of species. There have been 5 other extinctions of species since life began on Earth. This one is human caused, and we're initiating it right now. This century, by the middle of this century, we'll probably be seeing the annihilation of coral reefs worldwide. And 95% of the Earth's land is forecast by the United Nations to be degraded by 2050. Of all statistics, this is the one that I think blows me away more than almost anything. By 2050, there will be more plastic at current rates in the ocean than fish. Now, as many people are well aware, what we're experiencing as a result of what's sometimes called the Great Acceleration, almost everything you look at that relates to human activity has been just exploding ever since the Second World War ending, the GDP, water use, consumption, production, just about everything. And if we look at what's forecast under our current world system, what we see is a continuation of this incredible growth. So global production today is at 92 trillion, And by conservative forecasts, that's projected to triple by 2060. So all that destruction at the current rate of production now expected to triple. And that is largely because we are in the throes of this growth-based global economy that has as its overriding requirements to keep growing at all costs, to monetize everything as fast as possible in order to do this. And what that means is to turn humans into these kind of consumer zombies and to exploit every available resource on the earth as part of doing it. And that's both caused and is driven by this fact that 69 of the world's largest economies right now are not even countries, but are transnational corporations whose sole mission is to keep that growth happening as fast as possible, to basically turn the whole earth into this consumer, this place of consumption. So it's a system that isn't designed to look after the earth, but is designed to ultimately just mint billionaires. And it's one that's led to the greatest inequality in history, where right now the wealthiest 26 billionaires own as much wealth as half the entire world's population. Which makes, of course, many of us have to ask, is our civilization at this rate headed for collapse? Or can we transform our society for a flourishing future? Now I'm going to step back a little bit and take you through some work that I did on my earlier book, The Patterning Instinct, to look at how did we get to this place in the first place? Because it's only by really understanding that context of where we came from that we can really get a better sense of where we can head to. Well, what I found is that actually there have been only a couple of great transitions in human history. One from hunter-gatherers to agriculture about 10,000 years ago. One from agriculture to the scientific revolution about 400 years ago. This century, we're almost certainly going through one of those great transitions right now. Where is it going to go? That's the big question. So one of the things that I discovered in this book, The Patterning Instinct, and probably the biggest theme that came from it, is this simple message that culture shapes values, and values shape history. And by that same token, our values are what will shape the future. And when we look at those changes, those fundamental great transitions in human history, they all arose around fundamental transformations of values in the human experience. So I'll just take us really briefly through some of those historical patterns. Beginning with the value system of hunter-gatherers who saw nature based on this kind of root metaphor of nature as being a giving parent. And the way that values work is that from a core root metaphor of nature, all kinds of implications and ramifications emerge. So when you see nature as a giving parent, it makes sense to see all living beings a family, that we all have an intimate relationship with spirits, that we can trust nature to meet our needs, that everything is connected, and that the natural world, of course, has intrinsic value. Now that all changed about 10,000 years ago with the rise of agriculture, where a different kind of conception of nature arose, seeing it as a hierarchy of the gods. Now that began because of the fact that with agriculture came a separation that had never happened in human history before. So in some senses, I see this kind of fence as iconic of this rise of agriculture, because we see humans as now separate from nature and humans as separate from each other. So those who got lucky enough or worked hard enough to make more crops from their field, then kept other people out, leading to the rise in hierarchy where they might employ other people, and the rise of the sense of wealth, leading to this conception of nature itself as being a hierarchy of the gods, similar to the kind of conception that people had of their own society. So from that new root metaphor of a hierarchy of gods came these new ideas about core values, seeing the intrinsic value of wealth, possessions, and power, believing that you can't anymore trust the gods. You need to worship them. You need to sacrifice to them, and a priesthood emerged to like intermediate between people and the gods. And above all, this sense that you need to respect the hierarchy. And along with that, of course, came the rise of the patriarchy. Now, even though different agrarian civilizations looked very different around the world, they all had the shared sense of core values around the world until the next big shift in the human experience that took place with the scientific revolution about 400 years ago, where a new root metaphor of nature arose, the sense of nature as being a machine or a resource to exploit. And with this newer understanding of nature came the idea of the conquest of nature. If it was like a machine, you could figure out how it works. And then, as in the words of Francis Bacon, the great prophet of the scientific age, in that case, we could establish and extend the power of dominion of the human race itself over the universe, render ourselves the masters and possessors of nature. And the Europeans who did that also considered themselves conquering not just nature, but other continents, with this notion of exploitation as the core source of values. And that exploitation, that domination by the West led to our modern dominant system of values that we all see around us right now. It's the modern story of separation that tells us that nature is a machine, that humans are separate from nature, that humans are separate from each other, that human progress arises from the conquest of nature, that the earth is a resource to be used for human benefit, and that the purpose of life is to get wealthy and powerful. Those are the key stories that have led to this modern situation where we're ransacking the earth and this terrible existential crisis of climate breakdown. So just last week came another report by top scientists warning of the ghastly future of mass extinction and climate disruption unless we do something about it. So what can we do about it? Can we move towards a great transformation in human history to a more flourishing future? Well, in my view, the key to this lies in this finding that culture shapes values, values shape history, and our values will shape the future. So what we need above all is a transformation in values, an emphasis on the quality of life rather than material possessions, prioritizing progress in the quality, not quantity of things, basing our political, social, and economic choices on a sense of our shared humanity, emphasizing justice and dignity for all, and building civilization's future on the basis of symbiosis with the living earth, where the flourishing of the natural world is a foundational principle. Now, this shift in values is what I explore in my upcoming book. It's going to be published in June 2021, called The Web of Meaning, Integrating Science and Traditional Wisdom to Find Our Place in the Universe. And what I show in this book is that that modern story of separation that I took you through is not just dangerous, leading us to destruction, but it's plain wrong. It's based on an outmoded set of ideas from that scientific revolution time period, hundreds of years ago, that have been shown by modern science to be wrong. And what we see instead is that if you take some of the findings of recent science in recent decades, neuroscience, complexity science, evolutionary biology, system sciences, they lead to, they point to the same deep truths that traditional wisdom has been pointing to for millennia in indigenous knowledge, Taoism, Buddhism, and other wisdom traditions of our intrinsic connectedness. And so from that, we get to see the possibility of a new root metaphor for this great transformation we need that I call the web of meaning, this recognition that we are deeply interconnected in this deeply meaningful way with each other and with all of life. So in this upcoming book, I look at each of the great existential questions that we humans ask at some points in our lives, like who am I? Where am I? What am I? How should I live? Why am I? And in each case, I show how the way in which our modern culture answers these questions is just fundamentally wrong. And there is a different answer that this way of interconnectedness can lead us to coming to. Now, I'm going to take you through just a couple of these pointers in the rest of this presentation to give you a sense of what I mean in terms of where this is going. So let's look at this question, who am I? Well, one of the most powerful spokespeople for this kind of modern story of separation is Richard Dawkins, who answers this question, who am I, by referring to the selfish gene. He talks about how we and all other animals are machines created by our genes in a highly competitive world. And as a result, a predominant quality to be expected in a successful gene is ruthless selfishness. And that's how we need to understand who we are. And maybe we can overcome that through like fighting our intrinsic nature. But in fact, what modern biology shows is that the opposite is true. If you look at life itself, since it first began billions of years ago on Earth, every one of the major increases in complexity of life to complex cells, multicellular life, animals and mammals, have been the result of increases in cooperation between different organisms that learned how to optimize symbiotically with others. So that, in the words of biologist Lynn Margolis, life did not take over the world by combat, but by networking. And of all species, one of the paragons of that ability to network together is actually humans. Far from being these selfish, rational optimizers that modern neoliberal tells us we are, humans actually evolved to be cooperative. Back in the earliest days, in our evolution, humans were vulnerable to predators. Those who learned to collaborate with each other were the most successful. And their identity expanded from just self and kin to include the entire group. And so, in fact, what evolutionary biologists and cognitive biologists show us is that the human ability to cooperate with each other, even those who are not kin, is what differentiates us from other primates. And from that, we humans evolved what are called moral emotions, and things like compassion, guilt, shame, gratitude, embarrassment. These are all things we feel deeply. And we don't just act morally because we think we should, because we're trying to overcome those selfish genes, but we do it because it feels right. So let's just take a look at something that leads from this. And one of these other great existential questions, how should I live? Well, we get some great pointers from indigenous wisdom who took some of those core moral emotions that we just looked at and developed them into sophisticated ways of living together in community in harmonious ways, actually relating to those moral emotions. So a modern scholar, indigenous scholar, Comanche woman, Madonna Harris, studied this extensively and looked at not just Native American traditions, but indigenous traditions around the world, and identified what she calls the 4 R's of indigeneity. Relationship that recognizes the value in relationship with all life. Responsibility, like the imperative to nurture and care for relations. Reciprocity, to balance what is given and taken. And redistribution, the sharing obligation to share what one possesses in abundance. And we see this all over indigenous cultures. In Africa, see this core concept of Ubuntu, which roughly translated means I am because you are. And from that perspective, our modern world's neoliberal sort of sense of self-seeking behavior would be considered a form of madness. Similarly, in the Lakota, here in what's now North America, there's this core concept that's mitakuye oyasin, which basically means we are all related, referring not just to all the people around in community, but all of life. And we see these ideas elaborated in traditional cultures around the world. So in China, there was this incredible uh, an incredible syncretic philosophy called Neo-Confucianism from about 1,000 years ago. And one of their core philosophers, Chan Zai, this great expression of what they call run, which is a concept of sort of unconditional love. And he made this famous statement, "Heaven is my father and earth is my mother, and I, a small child, find myself placed intimately between them. What fills the universe I regard as my body. What directs the universe I regard as my nature. All people are my brothers and sisters. All things are my companions." And in modern times, we see these ideas expressed in a sense of like ecological ethics. Many people will be familiar with Aldo Leopold, who said, "A thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. It is wrong when it tends otherwise." Similarly, the great humanitarian Albert Schweitzer developed what we can think of as a life-based value system, based on this concept of recognizing that each of us can say that I am life that wills to live in the midst of life that wills to live. A parallel theme we see in deep ecology, this concept of we are nature, and a great philosopher of that, Oneness, talked about the concept of an ecological self. We may be said to be in and of nature from the very beginning of ourselves. And that can be expressed in terms of actions, political actions. There's this great slogan I saw in Paris during COP21. We are not fighting for nature. We are nature defending itself. Probably best summarized by Albert Schweitzer, who said at one point, "I cannot but have reverence for all that is called life. That is the beginning and foundation of morality." So one final pointer that we can look at in terms of some of these existential questions we ask and where that can lead is this core question, why am I? A question about purpose. Now, the classic modern answer to that, based on reductionist science, is like from this Nobel laureate, Steven Weinberg, who talks about the pointless universe. He quotes, "The more the universe seems comprehensible, the more it also seems pointless," he says. That's the classic expression of this understanding that we think is scientific, but is actually based on outmoded 17th century scientific thinking. When we start to think about the universe from a systems perspective of connectedness, we get to realize that meaning itself can be a function of that connectedness, that as the number of connections in a system increases, they lead to phase transitions and the emergence of new meaning. So you can just think about this in terms of looking at things that we're used to in our lives all around us. When words connect, language emerges. When organisms connect, an ecosystem emerges. When neurons connect, consciousness emerges. And probably everybody watching this is familiar with some kind of peak experience that you've had in your life where you've gotten that sense of this deep connectivity, that sense of deep meaning arising from the oneness of all we feel in all creation. And that sense of oneness is validated by what modern science tells us about the world. And it has implications of connectedness. The implications are that everything you do in your life creates ripples which affect everything else in the universe. This deep principle of the ultimate connectivity of everything in the universe. And from that, we recognize that we exist in an ocean of connectedness. Those ripples begin within each of us. And the choices we make, the personal choices and actions, choices we make to participate in regenerative community, choices we make to engage in the broader political process, choices we make to move towards a plant-based diet and all that that implies. Those are the choices that ultimately weave the web of meaning, this core new metaphor for a great transformation. Those are the choices that together we can work with others to help regenerate our beautiful, fragile earth the way it's calling for. So I just leave you with this question to ponder after this presentation is over, in terms of your own life, in terms of not just the these choices to go towards a plant-based diet, but in all those aspects of this interrelated web of meaning, what precious strands are you weaving in the web of meaning? So thank you very much. These are the books I've been referring to: The Patterning Instinct, The Web of Meaning, and you can find out more about my work on these websites. jeremylent.com. Patterns of Meaning is my blog, and leology.org refers to a nonprofit institute looking at this worldview of interconnectedness. So I will now get out of the screen share, and just like to thank you for your participation. Thank John for inviting me to be part of this panel, and look forward to the discussion very soon. Thank you. Bye.
What I'd like to know is, Jeremy, is where we're at now is a system of individuals and capitalism and getting ahead. Do you see us heading in the direction of connectiveness?
You know, I think right now we're at this choice point, that almost like a bifurcation point in our global society. And I see so many forces towards that global connectedness, that sense that we as humans are having for the first time really in history, thanks to the internet, thanks to our ability to share the cultures all around us. We have this really shift in consciousness towards a sense of planetary consciousness, a sense of our shared humanity and being part of life, just like we were talking about. At the same time, we see this horrendous juggernaut of destruction taking place. And we see this, the destructive elements from this neoliberal economy that's taken over the world, causing so many people around in different countries to feel alienated, dispossessed, and then get stirred up to then get into these putting up more barriers and feeling separate from each other and feeling this hatred and prejudice. So we see these different directions. And part of what I feel is so important, like I was saying at the end of this presentation, actually each of us is an agent in determining which direction we take this century, because it's only through the forces of connectivity that they can overcome those other forces of separation towards that flourishing potential.
Well, tell me, what do you see? Causing us? I think, I start thinking about iPhones and computers and that kind of interconnectedness. But do we need religion, a new religion? Do we need a new government? Regulations? How are we going to get ourselves from a society that is destructive and is self-centered to one that will cooperate and make the kind of changes we need to have made? I mean, with the fossil fuel industry, it's government regulation that's doing it. But to get people to change their food, I don't know, what are we going to do? Education? Do you see any tools that we can be focusing on?
I do. I think that the most important tool actually begins within each of us. It begins with our heart. It begins with our sense of being part of life, just like I was describing that beautiful quote from Albert Schweitzer, "I am life that wills to live in the midst of life that wills to live." And going back to those moral emotions I was describing, that actually a part of our shared humanity, that sense of compassion, that sense of sharing with each other, with community. And so what our media, what our corporate-driven media trying to turn us into these computer zombies has to do is essentially, it has to condition, brainwash every newborn human being to forget who they truly are as human beings and become part of this consumer system. So I think it has to begin with ourselves, with us really listening to what our hearts are truly telling us, our desire to actually have quality of life, quality of connection, a beautiful earth around us, and to start to notice the messages that are given to us by our mainstream media, and to start to actually speak with others, just like we're doing in this kind of talk today, connecting with others, recognizing that it's not just me who's a little bit crazy with these ideas of wanting to connect, but actually everyone else around me is feeling the same way. It's just this corporate-driven, profit-driven media is actually telling us something that is false. We can believe in ourselves and connect with each other.
Well, I'm going to push you and also the audience. What does this have to do with psychedelic experiences?
Well, I'll share my own perspective on that, is that actually I think that psychedelic experiences, of which I've had some in my life, when they're approached with an intention to really learn, to really deconstruct some of these messages, to really connect with what's really meaningful in life, and done so within the right set and setting and right context, can be very helpful in helping to sort of decondition these things that that cause our lives to be so fragmented and so broken apart right now. They can also be misused as we're all aware, and so they have to be taken as a real sacred sacrament, if you will, have to be treated with a great deal of respect and care and intentionality. And then I think they can have a very positive part to play in this kind of transformation we're talking about. Because
that's one of the universal messages that I get from the psychedelic world, is that people individually experience a oneness, experience a connectedness to the rest of the universe. And I have to tell you, as I'm listening to your presentation, that's one way I can understand what you're saying. Is, maybe you can have the psychedelic experience through a religious platform, but what we're talking about is a whole new world of psychedelics opening up our society. And there's some people who say, not that I've intended to get into this, and I certainly don't want to stretch you too far, but there's a whole part of our scientific understanding that says that this is going to be what's going to help us change as a population, and has already. To understand this oneness.
I think you're absolutely right there, John. And I would just add that actually there are research projects being done in the UK and in the United States, actually using neuroscientific tools to look at people's brains when they are taking things like psilocybin and other psychedelics. And what they see is so fascinating, because what they see is the usual ways in which the brain connects gets kind of defragmented, and it gets way more connected. All kinds of connections that don't usually take place happen in the brain of somebody who is on a psychedelic. And so I think that goes to this notion of connectivity, that what they actually do is they help us to reconnect with these deeper interweaving of all the different elements of our life that our normal mainstream culture tells us are separate. So I do think that's a very important point you raise.
Well, it's something I think will help a lot of people understand your talk. Heather, you have some comments or questions to Jeremy?
Well, I kind of along the same lines, but, as you were talking, I'm picking up things, networking, cooperative, connection, just this unity that we have. And I feel like there's such a disconnect right now. And psychedelics aside, I think, these types of conferences, just like you said, of you realizing that you're not crazy and there are other people out there thinking the same thing you are, is just so powerful. And, I really feel like we need to get back to that connection and that networking that human beings thrive on. And somehow we've lost that. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Heather. And something that I add to that in terms of that sense of connectivity is even, certainly in the United States, we're dealing with so much of this polarization of politics and values and all that stuff. And I think that people who are more on the progressive side also can fall prey to then starting to other those people who voted for the party we don't like, or voted against democracy, and then start to view them themselves as being intrinsically bad or whatever. And so I think that one of the most important things that we can do is stay very focused on the important ideals and values we care about, but really reach out to the humanity of those people who have been hurting so badly as a result of things that have gone wrong in our society, that they don't know where to turn, and really offer love and compassion, even while we're really striving hard for what we believe is right.